And I know you've written and presented a lot on the role of addictions and how it relates to habitual styles of thinking and that closed loop of traumatic experience. Just wondering what your perspective is on the recent media outlets reporting that alcohol consumption has greatly increased since this pandemic.
Addiction, the word addiction is a word that people don't like. They don't like to think that they're addicted to something. And people will go a long way to try to work around that word. And a lot of people who drink do that. And they don't see their behavior as being addictive because they will maybe even look it up online, and they will find definitions of addiction that say things like, does it disrupt your daily life or make it difficult for you to be employed? And the answer to that for most people is no, it doesn't affect those things at all. And so I can't be addicted according to the United Nations definition of addiction. Okay, I hear that a lot. And that's a significant issue because many people experience a generalized kind of impairment as the result of alcohol use. And so for the next little bit, I'm not going to use the word addiction, but let me play out a little bit how this looks. Many people, especially people in stressful positions, stressful professions, they have leftover stress. They're hypervigilant, as you said a few minutes ago. And that stress is really hard to let go of entirely. And also they get traumatized in the work that they do. And so they're carrying around trauma as well. And so there's a kind of momentum or an accumulation of emotional stress. And one of the things that alcohol is very good at is releasing the nervous system so that it goes into a kind of pattern. It's technically a fight response, but it gives the feeling that you can fight back against the things that have happened to you. It gives the feeling that you can be resilient and strong, even when the situation has been traumatic and difficult. And so what happens for many people who carry around leftover stress is that they drink. And they drink in one of two ways. Either they drink every day. So they might have a couple of beers every day. Not enough to get drunk, but enough to so-called take the edge off. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the edge? Why is there an edge? And what else could we do about this so that you don't have the experience of having an edge you are required to take off every day? So I'll come back to that in a minute. The second version of drinking that we see is binge drinking on the weekend, where people don't drink during the week, but on a Friday night or a Saturday night, they get really drunk. And they see that as letting off steam. And it's a similar kind of thing in the sense that the stress builds up to a certain point and then it's released. So it's released either on a daily basis by the person who drinks daily, or it's released once a week or a couple times a week on the weekend by the person who drinks weekly. But both of these behaviors are addictive. They both completely fit the pattern. So if I start to use the word addiction, what I would say is that addiction is a behavior that we do that brings the nervous system and our personal psychology into balance when we can't do it ourselves. When our own ability to bring ourselves into balance and stillness and relaxation, connection, all these kinds of things, when our stress exceeds our ability to do that, we will look for something that helps us. And the thing that helps us is the behavior or the substance, whatever it is, that for whatever reason works. It takes us to that place where we then feel okay. It takes us from not okay to okay. But it's not something that we're doing ourselves. It's something that an external agency is doing, a behavior or a substance. So that is my definition of addiction. It's the thing that we do instead of facing what's happening to us, which is that we're carrying around something we can't face. And we can't face it probably for a variety of reasons. But the stress of facing it is too strong. So we're stuck. We're stuck in this situation where we need something to take the stress of whatever it is we can't deal with away from us. We can't do it ourselves, so we need something to help us. So So this is typically what we see with alcoholism. And most people who are alcoholics would not say they're alcoholics. They would say that they're social drinkers. And in our society, it's acceptable to socially drink every day. And it's acceptable to binge drink, if not every weekend, then certainly on a regular basis and certainly on a holiday. And so the question I would ask people in that situation is, if you need something outside of you to bring yourself into balance, then that kind of suggests that left to your own devices, you're out of balance with something that's going on inside of you. And this situation will persist. It will not improve given what you currently do. One of the things we know about addiction is that it just continues to get worse. We know drinkers just tend to drink more and more and more. And alcohol in particular is notorious for this. If you ask people, how much do you drink? They'll give you a number that's about half what they actually drink. People are really good at fooling themselves about how much they drink. And alcohol, the use of alcohol just tends to creep up on people over the course of years, months or years, until the amount that they're drinking on a regular basis is way more than they used to drink before. And it happens it happens in a way that's almost unnoticed. It just sort of organically happens. And whenever the stress goes up, the drinking goes up. So that's why we're seeing more drinking right now. People are stressed out. And a lot of people are unable to deal with the underlying stress that's there all the time. And so if you put that stress up a little bit, they have to use the compensation that they normally use, which is drinking. Now, I've seen different statistics about this, but it looks like the amount of alcohol consumption has gone up by something like 40%. That's a crazy high number.
And just getting back to what you were mentioning, just the special privilege that our modern culture places on alcohol as opposed to other substances. When someone's hungover, it's not an overdose, it's hungover. We find ways to minimize the recovery process of being drunk, essentially.
Yeah, and it's a very hard conversation to have as well. When I do workshops or trainings for first responders or other groups, and I talk about alcohol, I do notice an interesting trend, which is that many people are thinking along the same lines as what I'm saying, and they do recognize this as a problem. But there are always people in the audience who laugh and who kind of snigger and whisper back and forth to one another. And you can see that there's still quite a few people who are just not prepared to buy that. They're not prepared to buy the idea that alcohol is a problem. Alcohol is just part of our culture, they say. It's just part of, what we need to do. Society is stressful, and what's wrong with blowing off a little steam? There's nothing wrong with blowing off a little steam. But if the steam that you have to blow off is the result of having something that's highly pressurized inside of you, that's a problem.
And I guess one thing, just to switch topics here a little bit, is finding creative ways to substitute that addiction and that compulsion to want to stay at home and drink. And you speak a lot about the role of creativity and wonder as part of a healing process. And I'm just wondering if that can play a part in the short term for people during this COVID pandemic.
Well, we live in a modern age where we think of ourselves as being very, very modern. And we don't tend to look back very much. But one of the things that happens when we look back at human societies for as long as we can look back is that creativity played a pretty foundational role in the health of the society. Whether it's storytelling or dance or mask making or craft or whatever it was, all traditional societies had creativity at the center of their cultural life. We have creativity at the center of our cultural life as well, in the sense that we're great consumers of creativity, especially television. But most of us aren't involved in creating anything anymore. We just consume. And that's a significant problem because for all of human culture up until the 20th century, the creativity, the primary role of creativity was to help heal ourselves and heal the society. So this is why all the great stories and all the great works of art are about healing, essentially. They're all about making it through something that's a struggle. They're all about the call to discovery, the descent to grapple with difficult things, the discovery of companions and mentors and guides in that human journey, the grappling with monsters, the discovery of the treasure of illumination and clarity and wisdom, and all these kinds of things. And a lot is known about the role that storytelling and creativity play in human development and human healing. And because we're living in a contemporary age where psychological practices we hear about have to do with thinking and our thought stream, we tend not to recognize that creative practices are still there and they're still as powerful as they ever were. So simple things like working in the garden, cultivating life in your garden, building something in your garage, building a piece of furniture, or building a musical instrument, or playing a musical instrument, or singing, or writing. There are a whole there's a whole universe of possibilities for creativity. Anything that fully engages our attention, particularly stuff that uses the hands, is a creative practice by definition. You know, it's interesting. When we look at the evolution of the human, we find in the evolution of our skeleton, our bones, over the course of the last 6 million years, we find that changes to the head, to the skull and to the brain have always come after changes in the hand. So what's happened there is that the human animal has gone out into the world and the hand has evolved to grapple with the physical world that we live in, to hold things, touch things, make things, craft things. And the brain, the human brain, is a response to that inquisitiveness of the hand. So in many ways, the human brain is a response to the human hand, not the other way around. The hand is a foundational piece of our development as a species. And so it's not an accident that in creative practices where people touch things, pottery, woodworking, gardening, those kinds of things, playing a musical instrument, the research is unequivocal. People derive a tremendous amount of emotional benefit from these things. It's often hard for people to say what the benefit, like how to articulate the benefit. But they say things like, I feel better. I feel as though I'm more relaxed. I feel more clear, more present. In the research that my colleagues and I did at museums all over the world, especially working with trauma, places like the 9/11 Museum and elsewhere, we worked with objects. We had people hold objects that were either associated with traumatic events, like at 9/11, we had people hold objects associated with that day, like steel from the Twin Towers. We also did work with people who brought objects that were of meaning to them, personal objects, little knickknacks they had at home, and so on. And we had people talk about what it was like to hold and describe the story of their objects. What was the meaning of the object to them? And the act of holding the object and describing its meaning was a very profound experience for many, many people that we worked with. And it makes the argument, I think, that working with our hands, doing something creative can be a very deep sustenance, especially in a time of stress. And all the stories of all the world's cultures tell us that when we start to do creative practice, it leads us inward. It leads us inward to a confrontation with the self. It leads us inward toward our emotional life. Creativity will make you emotional. It will make you connect to what's happening for you inside of yourself. And so in this particular time, when people might have a bit more opportunity to practice creativity, I think that would be a very good idea, to do something that connects you with the work of your hands, with something that practically and physically you can do. And most people who do that find a very deep emotional fulfillment as a result of that. You know, I was walking in my neighborhood yesterday, and a neighbor of mine down the street, he's got his garage door up, and he lives alone, an elderly guy, and his wife died a few years ago, and there he was in his garage making something out of wood. Just instinctively, he was drawn to make something. I'm not sure what he's making. It looks like a doghouse, maybe, but he's making something, right? and he was very mindful and very present, and he didn't even notice me as I walked by. You know, I was 20 or 30 feet away on the sidewalk, and he was working in there, and he was completely absorbed in the experience of making whatever it is that he's making. And I think that's a good example of what happens with creative work. It draws us in, and it provides us with a kind of emotional fulfillment that very few other things do, especially drinking doesn't do.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for tying that into the role of drinking as well. I work within a culture where symbolism is just so prevalent. The symbolic meaning of cultural grief and suffering, visually, the Maltese cross that you'll often see on firefighter vehicles driving around town, it plays a significant role in the way that we view ourselves in our world. One of the things I've noticed about being on the front line of this pandemic is that in some ways, the perception of firefighters have changed in the sense that we used to be perceived as community helpers. And now what we're seeing is when we gown up in these kind of level 2 or level 3 personal protective equipments in a random cul-de-sac or a townhouse, people are a little bit leery about us. What I've noticed in my personal life is social distancing for a first responder is more like 12 to 15 feet with your friends rather than 6 feet. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about what just your initial thoughts are on how first responders are now perceived in the community as from transitioning very quickly from people that you want to be around to people that you want to keep your distancing to. And I'm sure this applies to other frontline emergency workers like nurses and emergency room physicians and what have you.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the underlying anxiety that people are experiencing about the way that this situation is playing out and what their perceived risks are. And anybody is a potential source of risk, I think, in this situation.